And now that we've gotten down into Photoshop, I'm going to trust that most of you have a fairly good understanding of, how to go ahead and create a simple base map using street and building and parcel layer information, right? It's a relatively simple process, but there are a couple things that you should pay attention to. One of those that I forgot to do when I was exporting my data is that I forgot to turn on all of my layers, and so I had some of them, like the building layers, actually turned off before I went to export. And the impact of that was that when I opened it up in Photoshop, that nothing, or I was missing a number of the layers that I actually needed in order to do the next steps in the process. And so that might be something that impacted all of you as well. So it's good to remember that, usually there's a relatively simple fix when you're working between these different pieces of software. But as we're thinking about that, generally what you need to do is go ahead and pull up and organize your layers. One of the problems of going through the bridge of GIS to Illustrator to Photoshop is that instead of coming out with nice clean layers, each representing the information that you want, instead what you get is that you get a lot of clip groups, and you'll get some masks that exist on top of your data, and so things that need to be removed or corrected before you can actually kind of move forward with a clean base map. And so let's go ahead and take a quick look at what actually came in through that export process. And so I'll open this up here. And you're going to see that what comes in is that all of the layers in my layer menu are kind of a jumble, and so I need to go ahead and clean those up so that I can actually work with them. Right, so one of the things I almost always do is I go ahead and create a layer, label it out as background. I'm going to use my paint bucket and inside the background layer, and I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in so that I have a white background so that I can see everything in front of it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and generally turn everything else off. One of the things that you see is that this other two layer, folder up here, realistically seems to only contain my north arrow and my scale bar. These are things that I actually want to keep, but I don't need them as a group. I need them as a layer. And so what I just did there was that I went ahead and just separated this out, and so I'm actually going to call this one north arrow. And before I get done with that, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that layer. And what I'll do is I'll go into north arrow and I'll delete out I'll go ahead and delete out everything. Control Shift I inverts my selection. Do the same thing here, except I'm going to name this scale bar, and I will drop in here, Control Shift I, delete everything else off, and then now what I should have is two independent separate layers so that I can go ahead and move these pieces of information around as need be to complete my final layout. So that's kind of step one in this process. And again, one of the things that we know is that underneath this folder called layers is a bunch of other stuff going on. Here are some of the things that you're seeing is, image is set up as your aerial photograph. Here, let me turn that on. Turn everything else off except for that one. Right? It's just my aerial photograph, and all I really want to see is that aerial photograph. I don't want any of this other information. Well, the simplest thing to do, again, is just right-click and go ahead and merge the group. And so once I've merged a group, it's now called image. If I want to go ahead and correctly label that aerial photograph, away I go. You can do the same basic steps for all of these other layers up through here. Now, with one exception, and this is something that does come up relatively frequently. Turn that off real quick as well. And it's one of those, like, if I'm working with like my parcels layer information here, and go ahead and do that there real quick. Right, and so I have my parcels information here. If this won't merge as a group, right, or if it gives me problems and it doesn't want to all flatten down to one layer, something you can always do, and it looks like it worked in this case, but something you can always do is just create a new layer, and then you can merge those two layers, right? And so you can merge those layers together, and you can usually go ahead and get it to come out as a clean flattened layer. And so I'm just going to label this one out as parcels, and this is going to be in black. I know that the other one is the parcels in white, but again, I'm going to trust you to kind of take care of some of these other details. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause here real quick and flash forward. And now you can see that I've gone ahead and cleaned up my layer menu. And so all of these layers are represented, everything is on here and working. And so we certainly have all of this information ready to go to create a base map from this. Now there's a few things that you'll want to do just to go ahead and make some quick corrections. One of those that I went ahead and did, looking at my building footprints, I mean, there's certainly some inaccuracies you can see kind of over here that's just not perfect. It's not that big a deal though. But there is some new construction since 2018 that actually has changed this. And so if we go down here into kind of the downtown West Lafayette across, this is Chauncey Hill Mall. If you go across the street, we have the Rise and several other large buildings here. What I did in my other version of this drawing is I just went ahead and kind of traced out some outlines that roughly reflect what that looks like today. I'm going to do that here, kind of the cheater way for time. I'm going to go ahead and bring those two buildings in, drop them into space, go back into my building footprint layer, and I'm going to real quickly just go ahead and erase out the other things that are underneath that. So the old buildings that have been removed, the church and the gas station and other things that go along with it. With this layer 1, looks like the one thing that's missing is just a little bit of a boundary around the edge. We can go ahead and take care of that. Make it go ahead and roughly match everything else that's going on here. And away we go. Now that I've got that, I can actually go ahead and move my building footprint up on top so I can preserve my layer name. I'm going to merge those layers. And now my building footprints is, an accurate reflection of what the buildings look like to date. Right. So, I mean, those are tweaks that we know we can make relatively quickly. And so the last thing I want to show here in this video before we move on to kind of creating some of the simple base diagrams that you can do from here is that I want to go ahead and put a frame around my work. And you'll see that I do this in, in a lot of these projects is I leave room for a legend. And in order to do that, one of the things I'm going to need to do is change the image size or the canvas size. So I'm going to change the canvas size. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some room on the width. Go ahead and increase it over here. Go ahead and create out that. Now the next thing I do is that you could go through and trim off every single one of those layers to get down to exactly the area that you want to show. I could come in, do an inverse selection and go in and clip out every single one of those layers so that we have a nice clean boundary around our entire drawing. That's certainly one way to do it. The other way to do it, I have to just create a layer, call it frame. I'm going to move the frame to the top of the sheet and I'm going to go ahead and drop it in. The other thing you can do is you can come in and do an internal inside stroke. Looks great. Put a little small black boundary around it and look what we've got. Bring my north arrow, scale bar up on top, and or just grab the scale bar there and bring those over. And you can see now I'm more or less set up and ready to go to start creating some additional diagrams from here. You could also come in and add some additional features. I could put a drop shadow on all of the buildings. Lots of different things you can do from here, but again, I can kind of trust you to take care of those details. In the last video, we're going to go ahead and pick up with just, again, some very, very simple site diagrams that you can build off of this.